Today on our NOBTS Conversations, we have the privilege of talking with Dr. Chuck Kelley, the president of New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. So Dr. Kelley, we're so grateful to you for setting aside this time to talk with us and be with us today.
Happy to.
All right. Well, let's get right to it.
Okay.
I want to start with an area that you're particularly devoted to. You've devoted your life, your ministry to this, and that's the area of theological education. Talking about theological education, you began on faculty at New Orleans Seminary in 1983, stayed as a professor till 1996 when you became president. All that to say, you know theological education well. You've seen theological education adapt and shift, and you're also currently witnessing it and also helping theological education to adapt and shift. So with that said, what is the future of theological education? How will it continue to adapt and change over the coming years?
Answer that question with accuracy and you will be a wealthy man. The future is no one really knows what it's going to look like that much further down the line than we are right now. But I will tell you the issues that are driving theological education today are, number one, access. Providing as much access to theological education as possible. Number two, cost. That as our whole nation has been dealing with this great recession, it has put changes in higher education in general on steroids. And the cost of education, if you're at a university, a college, or a seminary, has been growing faster than many of the other costs in our culture. And so how do you keep theological education affordable for people? The third thing in there is the role of the church and experience in theological education. And people are much more conscious of the value of church experience and ministry experience as a part of theological education than they were before. So people understand, maybe if I am in a ministry setting, there's some value to that if I could layer theological education alongside of that. So you look at those three issues, making it as accessible as possible to people who would be considered non-traditional seminary students, not your classic, I just graduated from college and I'm coming to seminary, as well as keeping the cost of it affordable, as well as having it connected with the church and with ministry. Those are three of the big drivers, and it's affecting everybody now. It's affected us for a long time for a variety of reasons, and our strategy was viewed as a pretty unorthodox strategy for theological education. It's not unorthodox. This is the mainstream of educational strategy today.
Okay. Within the change, what are some of those key characteristics that you've experienced, maybe even initiated within theological education? What are some of the key characteristics that must be maintained in order for theological education to be at its best, to be at its peak, to be most effective?
Well, let me answer that in this way, and we'll come back if it doesn't answer your question exactly. The fundamental fact that has changed, that is ultimately changing nearly everything, and we're still in the early stages of how it's going to change everything, is the relationship of the individual to knowledge. That for hundreds of years, this was the relationship of the individual to knowledge. You gathered knowledge in a place, in books and in scholars who knew and understood those books. Students would come to that central place where knowledge was gathered. They would sit at the feet of the scholars and they would go in the library and they would read the books. They would get their training and education. They would go out and live their life and do their ministry. Now, knowledge is available from any point on the face of the earth if you have access to the internet. A great deal of knowledge. Not everything that is available on a seminary campus, but a lot of it. And so that simple fact, I do not have to be in a geographical location in order to have access to knowledge, has enormous ripples. So the task becomes different. Now, it's not so much that I have to teach students, you need to know X, Y, and Z. It's that if you Google something, you need to know that the first 25 things that come up on the search engine may not be right, that Wikipedia is not always a useful resource. And how do you filter the wheat from the chaff in terms of knowledge? And what we're moving into is a time when access to knowledge is not the issue. You have access to more knowledge you can ever use. Filtering the knowledge so that you get precisely what you need, so that what you get is true and accurate and relevant. That's the essential skill. So we're looking at having to equip students with different kinds of skills than we have had to in the past. Now, how does that translate? That translates in the simple fact that residential theological education continues to be very important. The reality is, although you have access to knowledge from anywhere on the earth, you don't always have access to people who really understand that knowledge. And to be able to sit at the feet of professors is a very valuable thing. To be able to be in a relationship, a personal relationship with people, which is such a strength at New Orleans Seminary. You know, we have no faculty lounges on the campus, and 60% of our faculty actually live on the campus with students, and our children play on the same playgrounds, and we eat in the same cafeteria. And you have that mentoring kind of environment that's a part of a residential campus that you simply don't get anywhere else. Plus you have the relationship building with other students, and these are people who'll be in ministry alongside you for the rest of your life. There's some real benefits to a residential education. You can do more. You have a wider array of choices and options with that, so that's very important. But now it's not the only choice that there is. And it may be that you're in an extension center and you have a ministry in a setting that's not at the seminary campus, but it's where the seminary has a mini campus. It's where the seminary conducts classes. And so you still have that opportunity for developing some sort of relationship with professors and your teachers. You have some sort of opportunity to develop relationships with other students. You're able to contextualize immediately what you learn and discuss in class. So maybe you're taking a course on an overview of the Old Testament, and you're doing a preaching series on Joshua, and those two things go along real well together. Or you're dealing with the dynamics of change, our interrelationships course, and it's talking about how to deal with conflict. And just so happens you're kind of in some rough waters in your church, and you can take those things in a classroom, and you don't use them one day, you use them tomorrow when you have that deacons meeting. And so there's some real advantages of doing an experiential component of education, and the size of the experiential component is getting bigger. And then the internet, of course, allows you to fit theological education much more into your schedule than the school's schedule, and you can do your work in a completely different kind of way. It requires more discipline. It requires the ability to structure your own life around the artificial demands of the academic world. And some people are really good at that, and some people are not really good at that. So I actually think the emerging issue is going to be learning styles. How do you best learn? And then your particular circumstances. What is God saying to you? Do you really need the added input? Do you really need the campus environment? Do you really need that interaction with other people that's a part of the educational experience? Or are you getting some things in your ministry setting that are very valuable, and that if you could just layer online courses on top of that, or a combination like the hybrid classes where you go to campus sometimes and you do work on the internet sometimes, and they're all a part of your experience. So in other words, it's that cafeteria. This is the image we use at New Orleans Seminary to understand what we're doing, and our students have embraced this. The truest thing about an NOBTS student that you can say is that they will take their courses in multiple delivery systems as a part of their educational process. And that statement is absolutely true, because the students are flowing from one delivery system to another based upon the particular circumstances of their life, their needs, their interests. So I just think we're looking at a time when the student plays a much larger role in determining how they are educated than they did in days gone by. They don't play that role by voting and telling the seminary what to do. They play that role by choosing options that fit into the circumstance.
Okay, good. Appreciate your insight in that. Let's shift gears a little bit to the Southern Baptist Convention.
Sure.
You wrote How Did They Do It? The Story of Southern Baptist Evangelism, which in essence is like the story of Southern Baptists. And so you're very familiar with the movements, the history of Southern Baptist Convention. So as you look at the convention now, how are Southern Baptists changing? How is the Southern Baptist Convention changing?
There's some mega shifts happening in Southern Baptist life, and we're in the midst of those mega shifts. And they're quite profound, and no one really knows the outcome of these things. And it's not necessarily positive, it's not necessarily negative. It's just simply very different. For instance, one mega shift is a mega shift from discipleship to worship. That if you were in a Baptist church in the first 5 or 6 decades of the 20th century and you had two needs. You needed to build space for a worship center, and you needed to build space for your Sunday school and educational discipleship program. Almost inevitably, you would have chosen to build the discipleship space first and the worship second. Today, that's flipped. If you were in the first 6 decades, you got most of your offering from Sunday school. You had a Sunday school percentage attendance that was higher than it is now. People were coming to Sunday school and they were reporting every week. They turned in their offering envelope. That offering envelope included, did you read your Bible every day? Did you pray every day? Did you share the gospel this week? Did you make any contacts? And in effect, it was a rolling program of discipleship with accountability built in the system. And so you could literally gather all that information and know how many Southern Baptists read their Bible this week. And you could get some kind of reading on that. Can you do that today? No. Because most churches do not get most of their offering at Sunday school. They do not, the offering envelopes do not have that kind of accountability process, and there isn't anything else that kind of congregational wide. Worship has become much bigger in church life, and so most churches do not view Sunday school as the engine pulling the train. Most churches would say worship is what's pulling our train, and they put more emphasis, more money, more staff resources and everything in worship. So that's a big change. And from a denomination in which Sunday school was the engine pulling the train to a denomination in which worship is the engine pulling the train is a very big difference. Another big difference would be from a laser to a collection of flashlights. And Southern Baptists did the most amazing job that you could ever imagine of coalescing the focus of all these churches into a single approach to missions. And everybody supported the cooperative program with some portion of their tithes and offerings each week. That money was gathered and it funded the work of the state conventions and the things they were doing, both to do ministry and to help and strengthen churches. It funded the International Mission Board. It funded the Home Mission Board, North American Mission Board. It funded 6 Southern Baptist seminaries, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, and all of those things did. Now, what's happening is we're pushing more and more of the churches to do those things themselves. And it is reducing the profile of what we are doing together. And we're taking that laser and we're turning it into a collection of flashlights. You don't lose the light, but you don't have the same penetrating kind of power. The light's not lost. But the question is, can you penetrate the darkness as much with 1,000 flashlights as you can with one laser? And the jury's out. We don't know, but that's in effect what's happening. And so the image of what we are doing together as a convention is less important than the image of what my church is doing. And there are lots of implications for that. So these are some of the things, and the things that concern me the most is this is a recent tweet that I sent. There is a profound difference in independent churches sharing similar values and autonomous churches sharing this in the same mission. And we are moving more and more to an image that looks more like independent Baptist churches than we are autonomous churches that are part of the same mission. We each have our own mission, and we don't think very much about the mission in terms of what all of us are doing together.
Building on that, and I know this is a constant, a recurring theme that you hit on regularly, is the emphasis on the local church. I guess just to put it simply, why is it so important to focus on the local church, or why is the local church important? And within that, why is the minister of the local church important?
Well, the local church always has been the center of the Southern Baptist universe. And this is the way it was in the New Testament. You had a much more localized sense of Christianity than a global sense of Christianity. And I think that has been true, and certainly for Baptists, that's who we are. We are local church people. There is no higher authority. The practical, functional value of that is the ability of the local church to adapt to whatever changes happen in its environment. You don't have to run and ask somebody if you can do something. You don't have to have your minister transferred from one place to another place if you want to stay and he wants to stay. You don't have to get approval for a strategy if there's something you want to do in your community. You don't have to ask somebody, what can we do with our money, with our budget? Everything is controlled locally, and so people are a part of that, and that works very efficiently in a free market kind of environment, and that's what the United States is. It's a free market kind of religious environment. There, all the other nations of the world, there was a national religion. In the United States, there never really was. And Baptists flourished in this nation on a larger scale than they flourished anywhere in the world because we're so well suited to the cultural context of America. And so local churches, I think, will always be the heart and soul. The key to me is, are we going to be able to continue functioning as a unit? A football team is a collection of really good athletes, and you can't be on a football team unless you're an athlete. Now, the left tackle has a different set of athletic skills than the wide receiver, and things that the left tackle might enjoy doing most don't necessarily help the running back the most. Maybe a tackle likes to pass block more than run block, or run block more than pass block. Maybe the linebacker is a better linebacker than the defensive lineman is a defensive lineman. But you put all those pieces together and you create a whole out of all the parts that can become a championship team. But if every player does only what that player does best, there are times when you don't need to do what really highlights that player. I don't need the wide receiver to demonstrate terrific pass catching skills when I'm running a dive up the middle. I need him to be able to block a little bit, which may not be as much fun, but it's necessary for the team to prosper in this particular setting. And Southern Baptists have always envisioned, this was what separated Southern Baptists from all the independent Baptist churches that were all over the South, is that we quickly developed this sense of team. We can do things together that we cannot do separately. And I never lose a sense of my individual responsibility. I mean, I'm in my community, in my neighborhood setting, and what I'm doing, I'm always accountable and responsible. But I also am a part of something larger. So that church of 69 that I was in on Sunday is a part of funding 5,000 international missionaries. And they are never going to have their own missionary like another church could have in funding and sending out their own missionary. We're working together. And these are not questions of good and bad. They're questions of what's the best way to accomplish the Great Commission. And time is going to tell. We're in the midst of some things that we don't know what the outcome of the story is going to be, but we'll see.
All right. Well, moving to a conclusion here, I want to give you an opportunity looking at those going into ministry, those in ministry. What has been one of the greatest lessons you've learned in your life and ministry that you would convey to those in ministry or going or headed in that direction?
Never forget God is always at work. There's never a moment, there's never a time, there's never a circumstance in which God is always at work. And God being at work is larger than what's happening in your particular life on this particular day. Sometimes the kingdom of God advances through the blood of its servants. Sometimes the kingdom of God advances through the joyful celebrations of its servants. Sometimes it flourishes in the midst of an abundance of great churches and great preachers, and sometimes it advances when the church is the church in the midst of the most horrific circumstances. But it really doesn't matter what's happening in your life and in your ministry. God is always at work, and you are a part of that. You play a particular role, whatever that role may be. And so we are in a day in which we have, for the first time in our history as a denomination, we have more declining churches than we do growing churches. We are in a day that is going to call for the most outstanding leaders the church has ever had in order to deal with the issues that we have to face. We have to learn how to become really good at doing church in urban areas, and we are not that good at that right now. Many Southern Baptists are not comfortable in a truly urban environment. We have to develop some skill sets that we don't have right now. We have to use some muscles that we haven't used. We have some really tricky dynamics to master. If you have a church that's plateaued or declining and it begins to show any kind of life, there will be conflict. There will be you cannot avoid, I don't care how nice you are, you cannot avoid conflict. And how you manage to deal with conflict and try to interpret it and push it in a healthy way as a part of a transition process. This is really important. Starting new churches is a big emphasis right now. This is really, really hard. And when you starting churches on a large scale, the difficulty of each one of those starts becomes significant. And I get tickled sometimes when students think, well, I want to start a new church so I won't have to deal with all those problems of a traditional church. I'm sorry, they're all people problems. They're all people problems. So you just are living in a day when it doesn't matter what God calls you to do in ministry, it's going to be a challenge. But what an opportunity. What an opportunity. An opportunity to help a very fruitful, productive convention of churches that's fallen asleep and is not being fruitful right now wake up again. It's never been done on a large scale in the history of Christianity. Can it happen? I think so. Because it isn't human genius, it's the power of God that drives it. That means it can happen. And it could happen now. So it's a wonderful time of opportunity. It's a great struggle and difficulty. But we are the people that God has raised up for this wonderful point in space and time. And as we fight our fights, as we do the warfare that we have to do in our particular ministry setting against Satan and the evil one, he never gives up ground easily. As we figure out complicated problems and look for solutions in difficult settings, when you do not feel like your life is being fruitful at all, you're wrong. Because God is always at work. And I think that is one of the most important things for people to take into their work and their ministry every single day. The certain knowledge that God is always at work.
Well, what an appropriate word to end on there, Dr. Kelley. We appreciate your time. Thank you for your life, your service to the Lord, and your ministry at New Orleans Seminary. So thank you so much.
Happy to do it. The best is yet to come.